So welcome to the enterprise-wide employee well-being workshop. And the vision of the employee well-being team is to create the culture and environment where our employees feel supported in all aspects of their work and life, allowing our people to do their best work. And in order to best support you, we have a variety of resources available at the Wellbeing Central intranet site. At Wellbeing Central, you'll find the Wellbeing Network newsletter, Wellbeing Index, along with opportunities to register for virtual wellbeing coaching or other virtual workshops like this one. In addition, we offer peer-to-peer support through the HELP program or other resources to foster well-being within the work unit, such as our Wellbeing Champion program, Supervisor Toolkit, or recognition resources. In addition, it's important to the employee wellbeing team that we offer you resources that foster the Mayo Clinic values, especially fostering compassion and healing during this difficult time. And so I'm so grateful to have Dr. Craig Sawchuk here to speak on Enter Sandman, Behavioral Interventions to Help You Sleep. Welcome, Dr. Sawchuk.
Oops. All right. Thank you so much, Bridget, for that lovely introduction. And even when we had queued it up with being able to quickly transition over into the slides, for whatever reason, it worked fine to some practice, and then it threw a curveball, on my end. But again, thank you again for joining today. I had a great time chatting with the group. I think almost about this time last year, and I know last year we were a lot more optimistic about getting a little bit closer to the other side of the pandemic. And we just want to keep maintaining that optimism. We're still in a very different place than we were last year, and we will get there. So thank you again for joining today. I hope that we have Metallica fans here today. Otherwise, this is going to be a very excruciating chat for you to go through. And I thought that initially the title of the presentation that kept showing up was Enter Sandman, Behavioral Interventions to Help You Sleep at 12 p.m. Central Time. So it kind of set up the idea that, well, I guess as we're going through it today, is that you may fall asleep as we're moving along, but it's great to have you here. All right. So the objectives of today is we're actually going to be talking a lot about how do we actually look at sleep from a behavioral perspective. Where does it come from? The importance of the intervention to really look at how sleep problems, which are like super common, get maintained over time. And one of the best interventions, and in fact, the first line intervention for the treatment of sleep disruption and insomnia is CBT-I, or cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And we'll get into talking about what are the guts, what are the principles of doing CBT-I, and a couple of the heaviest hitters that are the most responsible for treatment outcomes in CBT-I are these rather clunky behavioral terms called stimulus control and sleep restriction. We'll talk about what those things actually mean, because there's a heck of a lot more to this intervention than just the cool, dark, quiet, turn off electronics type of thing. All right, and then we'll also wrap things up by talking about some resources, a variety of different resources that can help you get in touch with CBT-I, some of which are totally free and easy to get out there. Other ones are some step-up interventions in terms of just really good self-help books that are there, and then also some resources here at Mayo Clinic that you can access through primary care. So we'll kind of go through that. So I wonder, why is sleep, so important? I love having the chat version, set up right there, and people can throw in some ideas of why sleep is so important. It's just an absolute fundamental part of being human. We need to refill our tank, and sleep is the most important thing in terms of building in restoration. As the pandemic started to pick up speed in 2020, and not like it's entirely slowed down, but when putting all things on the table in terms of what's one health related behavior that we want to pay attention to, sleep, that's the one that we really, really want to focus in on. But sleep problems aren't necessarily only because people are not getting enough sleep. Sometimes, people are kind of a little bit more in that hibernation mode, and almost that we've run into, because of the pandemic and disruptions in rhythms, we actually may be seeing more of a hypersomnia happening as well too. But it's so important for every facet of our functioning. So if there's one health related behavior to target, it's definitely sleep. And the Mayo brothers, because healthy sleep absolutely rocks. So I'm sure that Will and Charlie also love Metallica and big fans of that. But healthy sleep rocks. So it is really, really common sleep disruption. We think of this as just part of the human experience, and all of us, to a certain degree, over the course of our lives, have gone through times when my sleep's been in a really good window and a really good rhythm, and other times where, just kind of like a snow globe, things get shook up and our sleep kind of gets derailed. And sometimes we can explain as to exactly why that happened. That was like a transition, or, I can remember back when I was living in Seattle, my wife and I had twins. Sleep was completely off the rails for a very long time, that's there. So sometimes we can point to specific things that actually happen, but other times it just kind of creeps up on us as well too, and it doesn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary, but our sleep can actually get derailed. So this is really, really common that we see in across the United States, of people struggling with insomnia. And this is a very, very common symptom that's reported in primary care prior, to the pandemic. Again, it's one of those symptoms of just being human, and there's lots of different things that we go through health related wise that actually impacts our ability to have good quality sleep. And of course, there's some, respiratory related things like COPD or obstructive sleep apnea that can be associated with increased, risk of insomnia. But as all of us, another part of being human is all of us are going through the pandemic, and all of us have seen pretty much every facet of our life undergoing some significant change and uncertainty. So, as we've done some epidemiologic studies over the course of the pandemic, just symptoms of anxiety, depression, stress, trauma, and insomnia have been going up across the board. If we look at in comparison to rates pre-pandemic, what we've seen. And there was a very, very recent meta-analytic study that was an international study that was done, that in terms of 36% of the population are reporting sleep problems at this juncture during the pandemic. Now, there are some aggravating factors, probably not too much to people's surprise, but folks that have been positive with COVID, given the types of symptoms with the respiratory disruption, the significant energy, disruption, having to isolate as well too. About 76% of folks will report significant sleep disruption in COVID positive. Frontline healthcare workers, also a higher risk category, and maybe this comes as no surprise to so many of our colleagues, nurses are the most at-risk group. And when you think about not only being on the front line and the ultimate of being on the front line, but also the varying shifts, the increased demands and the pulling, on our nursing staff to cover all those shortages as well too. And folks with psychiatric comorbidities, so pre-existing anxiety, depression, can also lead to an aggravation in sleep. So there's certainly not an absence of sleep related problems. So getting back to Metallica's Enter Sandman, sleep with one eye open. Well, according to our ophthalmology and sleep experts, that's called nocturnal legophthalmos, which I probably butchered how to say it. It doesn't roll off the tongue very easily, but that's somebody who their eyelids don't close all the way, whether it be one or both. And yeah, it can kind of dry out your eye, can lead to some disrupted sleep as well too. So you probably want to get that checked out. And gripping your pillow tight may have something to do with restless arm syndrome. But any of those things going on, probably want to get that checked out. But another, we can really say this across anything COVID related. We gotta blame something for it, but everything is blamed on COVID. But COVID somnia is a term that's kind of floating around out there, and it's just an appreciation that things are not normal. And when things are not normal, they impact us. And one of our basic rhythms of functioning is our sleep. So there's some biologic impacts with just phase shifting. And this also weaves in like a little bit of behavioral, but just with the changes with work, it's kind of disrupted some of our normal rhythms. Uh, People tend to be overshooting or undershooting their sleep windows. That was my comment a little bit earlier on about it's not just troubles falling asleep, staying asleep at night, early awakening. We people can be more in a rest mode, so we've been a little more sedentary over the course of the pandemic. Trust me, as a clinical psychologist, it's not known to be the most physically active type of profession that's out there. So definitely my sedentary behaviors, kind of gone up. But folks can be caught up more in that hibernation where we're kind of operating at a bit of a lower gear environmentally. And I know a lot of people on the presentation today can appreciate working from home, which certainly can have its benefits without a doubt, but it can also cause some problems in terms of, is your work environment actually, is your home environment actually built well enough to be able to work from home? Some people's bedrooms have also become their office in an unintended way. But as we'll talk about a little bit later on, when we're talking about the principles of stimulus control, boy, we really, really want to make sure that that bedroom and that bed is really, really distilled and associated with sleep, especially when we start to move from just having, episodic sleep problems to when sleep problems take on a life of their own. And it feels like more nights than not, we're not sleeping very well. And then there's also that disruption in daily rhythms, and especially if we're doing more work from home. Again, plenty of advantages to it, but there's also like a lot of other rhythms that happen over the course of a given day that give us cues to be awake. So, for example, just the kind of ritual or routine of waking up, having a shower, getting dressed, having a cup of coffee, watching TV, packing your lunch, going out to work, and swinging by. In my world, love swinging by Starbucks and then getting into work and saying hi to folks. All of those are associated with wakefulness, and when our routines have really been disrupted and we're doing a lot more things virtually, it really throws off some of those rhythms. So even those environmental cues for wakefulness, in addition to environmental cues to help promote sleep, those have kind of been shooken up by a snow globe. And as we alluded to a little bit earlier, a lot of us are struggling too. There's just so much uncertainty in so many different parts of our life right now. And also, just the burden of mental health problems have been increasing over time. So, these three factors are just really contributing to things not being normal, which creates almost like a perfect storm for these sleep related problems to come out. So, we're going to take a step back and talk about the idea of insomnia as really a learned pattern across time. We can think of there are different types of precipitating factors. So these may be remote factors that make us more vulnerable, to insomnia. There could be, some medical related issues that were going on. Stressful life events, can go on. Um, but also remember, sometimes insomnia just kind of creeps up on us. But these are, three areas that are very, very common in precipitating factors that initially can just lead to sleep problems. Our sleep kind of gets derailed, and we start to experience some of the consequences of non-restorative sleep. So whether it be that we start to feel just bagged and really tired, during the day, it starts to negatively impact just the efficiency at work or even getting things done. It's like harder to think. Maybe I'm a little bit more cranky. So having the non-restorative sleep has very genuine consequences, and maybe a night or two or a day or two of struggling through that's okay, but and that's not entirely abnormal. But when more often than not, more days during the week are becoming like that, and you start to string those things together, there are some real world impacts that start to happen on us. And in turn, in order to get by and honestly just kind of survive, there are these compensatory behaviors that develop, which totally makes sense. So napping can be one of those things. If a person's schedule or environment allows, they may be just trying to get sleep wherever they can. Increasing caffeine, I will not cast any stones. I love my coffee, but that can be a very common thing that we start to increase our caffeine, especially during times of the day where we may be more vulnerable to feeling really, really tired and sleepy. We can start to worry, whether it's the worry about all the things that are maybe going on in our life, or the worry of my sleep getting derailed and now this is causing me problems, say at work, and again, less physically active because we're just tired. It's harder to push ourselves to be active, but those sleep problems start to lead to these compensatory behaviors to make up for them, and that creates this unintended but vicious cycle in which insomnia really starts to come to play. So just another way of kind of looking at the same type of idea, it's almost like an unintended learned pattern. These sleep problems develop, they have realistic consequences, we start to change our habits, and it keeps the cycle going. And once again, it's a learned pattern. So that also means that we can be very intentional, and really look at, can we relearn a new pattern? And there'll be a line that will be coming up very soon, of the benefit that we have is nighttime always comes. So there's always, always an opportunity to really look at, how can we compensate for those things? How can we relearn new patterns? And sometimes relearning these patterns may be relearning old patterns that we had learned beforehand, which will be very helpful to us. But this is one of the things that is a good take-home message, is that insomnia is very, very treatable. Of all the conditions that we deal with health-wise and mental health as well too. We've got excellent data on the effectiveness and the efficacy of behavioral interventions for insomnia. So we just got to make sure that we're helping to be good consumers of our care and getting us pointed in the right direction. So some really, really good take-home messages, even though we've known this for a very, very long time, that cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBT-I, is a very effective treatment. It wasn't until semi-recently in 2016, thankfully pre-pandemic, that the American College of Physicians named CBT-I as the first-line treatment for insomnia. It totally makes sense, how whenever we have sleep problems, we get engaged, say with our primary care, family medicine provider, and there's lots of different, sleep-related aids that are out there. So just the prescriptions for sleep aids have just gone up a ton over time, but the realization that sleep aids, from a medication standpoint, are usually only designed to be used in a very brief window, but people were finding that they were on these medications for a long period of time. But CBTI is an extremely effective, more durable outcome, and really safe. And what's really cool too about CBTI is that there's lots of really cool ways that we can deliver it as well too. And we're going to talk about a few of those different ideas, from self-help options to online things to apps, but also individual therapies or group therapies. So there's lots of different ways to be able to package the intervention to meet people where they're at. So we got to take this idea, or this foundation, that insomnia is that unintended learned pattern across time. We're not necessarily as concerned, barring medical rule outs, where this came from. We're actually looking at, how are things being maintained over time, because those are actually controllable factors that we can work on. And I constantly, are telling my patients and my colleagues, when we're focusing in on insomnia, the benefit that we have is nighttime always comes. So there's always a really, really good opportunity to put these skills into play. And then the redundancy of the next night always coming, and so on and so forth, it allows us to get into a new and healthier rhythm with our sleep. So let's get into talk about, well, what does CBTI actually involve? So a good visual to think of the different components of CBTI are four steps. You'll see that there are two narrow steps, one at the bottom and one at the top, and two larger steps in the red font, being large steps. Really what this is designed to show is just where the real strength, where the real change in a true behavioral intervention for insomnia rests. If we could do a play on words there, it's stimulus control and sleep restriction. Those are the two components that really drive the outcomes in behavioral therapy for insomnia. The smaller steps, they can be important. So we think of self-monitoring in terms of doing sleep logs and the basics around sleep hygiene. Those are good to have as a foundation. And that could be like sleep hygiene, for example, can be really, really helpful if you're having a very transient sleep disruption. But when you're actually struggling with insomnia, if you were working at nothing but sleep hygiene and you could be doing everything exactly right and still have sleep problems, that's not where we want to put all of our effort in the intervention. And flip side, to the very top, thinking strategies that we'll review, towards the end of our presentation today, and relaxation skills. For some people, that plays a huge role in their sleep, just laying in bed awake, maybe not worrying per se, but they got the busy brain and they just can't shut their brain off, even though intellectually they just don't want to be thinking about this stuff. For some people, some of the thinking strategies that we'll review are really, really helpful to them, whereas for other people, it may not be much of an issue. So that's why whenever we're meeting with somebody, we're really trying to devote the majority of our time around learning those principles of stimulus control and sleep restriction, because they are the biggest drivers of outcome there. So healthy sleep habits goes by a lot of different names. Sleep hygiene, anytime, wherever struggling with sleep, those are always the first things that are suggested and always the first things that we try to intervene on. And it's kind of the basics. We think of the make your bedroom cool, dark, and quiet. It's kind of like the cave analogy. Sometimes a low budget intervention is anywhere in your room where there may be just even a tiny little LED light. Get a piece of electrician's tape and put it on there. When we go to hotels, there's those like really, really heavy blinders, on the windows that make it extra dark. So there's lots of these different things that are listed on here. Not going to go into really any of them in detail, where we're just trying to exit light and trying to enter night. So we're trying to just really maximize, that darkness and get our body into really kind of a sleep related rhythm. That's what we're looking for. If we're thinking about sleeping, one of our most basic biorhythms that we have, it's kind of like a machine. If we can try to calibrate it in a way that helps us to sleep better and get it on a consistent routine, then we stand a much better chance of getting the intended outcome of just having more restorative types of sleep. The reality is that the vast majority of us just have horrible sleep habits. I mean, I'm kind of the worst for it myself. Is that my wife and I are from the Pacific Northwest, so it's not and had not been uncommon that 11:30 at night we'd have a venti Starbucks and then have music going on. When I was growing up, I had a turtle tank in my bedroom with a heat lamp that was right there. So it all was a horrible sleep environment, but I didn't struggle with insomnia. The challenge is that when people are struggling with insomnia, they really have to work a lot harder, and sometimes having to negotiate, if you have a bed partner too, negotiating some of these sleep hygiene related things. But again, these are good to have as a foundation, but the real work and the real effectiveness of a behavioral sleep intervention comes from these other things. So the first, heavy hitter of the two is stimulus control. Once again, super clunky behavioral term, but the basic idea with stimulus control is your bed in your bedroom is a really, really unique environment. So what we're actually trying to do here is reassociating the bed in the bedroom with nighttime and sleep. We think of examples that we may have gone through in the past, where, living in the dorm, there's like no association, with our bed with the sleep. It is kind of Grand Central Station in many ways. That's where we do our homework, hang out with our friends, kind of watch TV, all sorts of things, like that. So it's not very well associated with sleep. But we're also seeing a lot of this too, with both pre-pandemic, but especially during the pandemic, where the bedroom may be the only room in the house that they have where they have to do some of their work as well too. So it's become an office. So, and being in an office setting is associated with a more wakeful environment, whereas what we're trying to do is reassociate this environment, our bed and our bedroom, with nighttime and sleep. So there's a few different steps that we want to go through. One is what we refer to as kind of the washout routine, or kind of a wind down routine. So try to think about this about 30 minutes up to about an hour before your targeted bedtime. So let's just say your targeted bedtime is 10 o'clock. At about anywhere between 9 and 9:30, you want to start this kind of washout routine where we're really trying to settle the brain down. I think a really, really helpful way of thinking about this is with anybody who's done, who has kids or has done a lot of caregiving with kids. We work so hard to try to get our kiddos to sleep at night. It's like a survival skill for adulthood to get our kids to be able to sleep. But what does it look like? Well, we could have our kids, playing around, outside or downstairs, maybe even watching like a little bit of TV as well too. But it's not like we say, okay, go to bed right away. No, we actually, it's kind of like a bit of a ritual that we work with kids. So what we do is we start to settle things down. So we, turn off, the electronics, the lights get a little bit low, our voice starts to change. So we get in that lower stimulation. We may like turn off, the phones or other things like that. Then there's other routines and rituals, like say having a warm bath and getting changed into comfy clothes and brushing our teeth, and maybe like a little snack, or getting into bed, reading a bedtime story, and lights out. And what we do the next night is we repeat, and the next night and repeat, and the next night and we repeat. Just really actually try to think about that for a second from a brain, learning standpoint, that with that redundancy and repetition, what we're actually creating for our brain are signposts that nighttime is coming. So just as that, okay, oh, now playtime is over. We're starting to, oh, okay, electronics are going down, lights are getting low, mom and dad or my caregiver's changing their voice, bedtime, or sorry, warm bath, comfy clothes. So all of those things are signposts that nighttime is coming. That has a tremendously big impact on learning how to sleep when we're kids, and as adults we're just kind of grown up kids, so we want to do the same kind of thing. So if we can kind of get a little bit ritualistic here too, and work at washing out, reducing some of that stimulation, this is a really good thing that we can do for ourselves. And then our goal, is to get to bed at a targeted bedtime. So a reliable bedtime in the example that we gave, if we say start our wind down routine, washout routine at about 9:30 with our targeted bedtime at 10, that's when, lights are out, and hopefully we fall asleep. But if we're really struggling with our sleep, that's maybe not always the case. So one of the things that we really pay attention to is that if I'm awake in bed longer than an estimated 15 to 20 minutes during that sleep window, we'll say my sleep window is the time my targeted bedtime and the targeted wake up time. So let's just say for easy math, it's 10 o'clock at night is my targeted bedtime and 6 in the morning is my targeted wake time. Anytime in between that window, if I'm laying in bed for an estimated longer than 15 or 20 minutes, then we actually want you to get up. Because if you're laying in bed, kind of tossing and turning and not sleeping during that sleep window, we are starting to associate the bed and nighttime not with sleep, with actually being awake. So sometimes we're given well-intended but bad advice, of, well, you're not sleeping, but you're at least resting. It's like, no, that's a bad idea, because you're actually laying in bed during normal wakeful or you're laying in bed being awake when we're really trying to maximize that association with being asleep. Now, a couple of times I've mentioned that an estimated 15 to 20 minutes, because we don't want you clock watching either. If you've seen the previous slide, we said, get rid of the clock, turn in the other direction. So we're kind of going on best guess. If you feel like it's been about 15 to 20 minutes laying in bed awake, that's a good time to get up and go into another room. Now, sometimes, what happens when people get so frustrated with not being able to sleep at night, and I totally get this as well too. It's like, well, if I'm not sleeping, I may as well, watch a stupid movie, or maybe I'll, try to get caught up on emails, or maybe I'll try to, knock out, a load of laundry or something. They're trying to do things to either promote, getting bored maybe and falling back asleep, or just it's almost like penance trying to make up for not being as efficient the previous day. The problem is watching TV beyond the light, doing chores or emails. Those are all associated with wakeful activities, normal wakeful hours. So also think of what the brain is learning is that, oh, okay, I should be awake during this time, or should be asleep during this time, but I'm doing wakeful things. So our goal is going into another room, be in a sitting up position. So like, let's just say you go from your bedroom into a family room, be in a sitting up position. We don't want to get like too comfortable and lean over, because sometimes we can just like drift off and fall back asleep. And then our brain learns, oh, I spend part of my night in my bedroom, part of my night, on the couch here. We want to be in a sitting up position, and we want you to do boring things. Boring things could be listening, to this talk that I'm doing right now. I'm sure it's already put, some of you to sleep already. But there can also be other things, like maybe not listening to Metallica music, soft music, doing relaxation skills. Sometimes people are like really good, say, with knitting or other things. Not that they have to think about it, but they can just kind of do it, automatically. Something that's very redundant and boring. So just kind of ask yourself, what kinds of things could I maybe have there that's available? Will this wake up my brain, or will it settle it down? And we're just trying to aim for those things that will settle it down. We want to do boring things until we start to feel sleepy, not tired. And this is tricky, trying to tease out being tired from actually being sleepy. And the two factors that our body shows that we are sleepy rather than just tired. And if we were in a if I could see everybody, guaranteed we'd be seeing a few people doing this. There's two things that our body will do for us. One is kind of like the head nod, so our head, just kind of starts to bob, down. So that's a sign that sleepiness is there. And then secondly, our eyes get really, really heavy as well too. So when you get the head bob and or the sleepy eyes happening, those are really good signs of going back to bed. Yawning, not quite. We can yawn and tired but not sleepy. We can certainly yawn and be sleepy. So yawning isn't as much of a differentiator, but that kind of head bob, heavy eyes, those are good signs. Then go back to bed. And hopefully we're able to fall back asleep, right away. But if you go back into your bed and in your bedroom, and then it feels like it's been about another 15 to 20 minutes, so I haven't fallen asleep, get back up and repeat that. We kind of refer to it sometimes early in doing this intervention. It's kind of like ping ponging. We may be up and down a little bit more in order for that to really kind of settle in. So we encourage people to do that until their targeted wake up time. And then at their targeted wake up time, so at 6 o'clock in the morning, they start their wake up routine. So it could be like, I go to the bathroom, I throw on a cup of coffee, I turn on the TV. For me, it's like watching the Olympics, right now. But you begin the morning routine, because just like how we're talking about on the front end, there are cues that are and signposts that sleep is coming. There are also part of these wake up cues that these are signs and cues and signposts that it's time to be awake. So the brain learns, from these things, but these can be really, really helpful steps and strategies for folks to kind of wrestle with it. It's really remarkable. Some people can be struggling with insomnia for a huge chunk of their life. And even over the course of a few nights or a couple of weeks of getting into this routine, can be unbelievably helpful for them as well too. And once again, the benefits that nighttime always comes. So sometimes for some people, we also have to talk about trying to reduce as much as possible any additional time that they hang out in their bedroom. There are plenty of times where we go into our bedroom without any intention at all to fall asleep. So whether it be like it's a place where I hang out with my kids or just kind of relax, or maybe like a lot of people, we've got a TV in the bedroom and I'm just laying on my bed watching TV. If you've got insomnia, those are bad ideas as well too. Is just try to limit and eliminate as much as possible any activity that happens in the bedroom during normal wakeful hours. So it really maximizes and in some ways kind of purifies that environment really, really associated with sleep. So this is a really big principle there. Sleep restriction always sounds a little bit meaner than it actually is. One of my colleagues has called it sleep reorganizing, which I like, sounds a lot better. And it really is a very, very helpful intervention for anybody who struggles with that fragmented sleep. So just up and down a lot during the night, or it doesn't feel like they really get into much of a deep sleep. So the sleep restriction is a way that we help compress that sleep window. We kind of squeeze it a little bit tighter. And the different steps that we go through with this is really we're trying to limit our time in bed to our average total sleep time. So this is where actually like doing the sleep logs, we're not covering doing sleep logs today. In all the resources that I'm sharing at the end, we'll talk to a certain degree about sleep logs, but this is where sleep logs are really, really handy for us, because we start to look at, okay, what's the total amount of time in bed? So that's your sleep window. So that previous example that I gave was, say, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. That's my sleep window. I'm in bed for 8 hours. But say when you're doing your tracking of your sleep, maybe you're only getting about 6 hours, total of sleep during that sleep window. And we can actually work with people to calculate sleep efficiency. So that's the total amount of time that you're actually asleep divided by the total amount of time that you're in bed during that sleep window. And we're trying to aim for closer to like 90%. So 90% of the time that I'm in bed, I'm actually asleep. So we kind of limit that amount of time, in bed. So in the example that I gave, if I'm going to bed at 10 o'clock at night, and then I'm waking up at 6 in the morning, but I'm probably only sleeping about 6 hours, then my new bedtime actually would be more like midnight. So we're kind of shifting it that 2 hours. So we're just compressing that window. So think about whenever we're doing sleep restriction, we're keeping our wake time the same. And so we're still waking up at in this example, at 6 in the morning, but I'm shifting my bedtime to later. So it was 10 o'clock. Now I'm just shifting to midnight. So it's kind of like compressing that window. So we're trying to really kind of build up that sleep drive. Now, the thing is that we can do that and then still during that sleep window is wake up and be laying in bed for an estimated 15 to 20 minutes. Yep, you want to do the stimulus control piece. So you still want to get up, get out of bed, go into another room and only come back when you're sleepy, but not tired. So we want to make sure that we're still doing the stimulus control. And we also want to make sure that, that's going to create temporarily extra fatigue the next day, and that's where it becomes really tempting to pound back another cup of coffee or maybe go to bed earlier the next night, or other things like that too. We want to keep doing the best that we can to keep all those other healthy habits and sleep hygiene things also in play as well too. So we can fight off that extra caffeine and still keep pushing until that targeted new targeted bedtime at midnight. Just think about, we're building up sleep drive. It's almost like our body's like craving sleep, and if we can keep distilling that bed and that bedroom at night, then we're really helping to condition both the brain and the body to expect that sleep. So we also want to make sure that we help people find that sleep window that works the best for them. So once people really start to get into a good rhythm of improved sleep by doing sleep restriction, then we can start to shift that bedtime, targeted bedtime backwards. And we usually start off at like 30 minutes. So we may go from now going to bed at a targeted 11:30, see how that goes. Hey, if we still are able to maintain a good 5 to 7 nights of pretty good sleep, then maybe I'll try 11 o'clock as my new targeted bedtime. So we can kind of shift it around, by 30 minutes. And even though I didn't mention this earlier, that washout routine and that wind down routine, that follows along with us as well too. So if my new targeted bedtime now is 11:30, my wind down routine is between say 11 and 11:30. So that kind of moves along with us. And sometimes we actually get back to whatever historical sleep window we've operated in and have done well with. But sometimes we may have a return of the fragmented sleep. So then we just reverse the step, and maybe stick at that previous step for a longer period of time. Maybe stay on it for a handful of weeks, really get it under good control. And then we've had people sometimes just gradually shift it, say back 15 minutes as their new targeted bedtime. So there's kind of some more finer grain things that we can do, but sleep restriction also a really, really helpful, way to help promote that more consistent sleep. And more consistent sleep typically helps with more restorative sleep. We're not going to get too much into the weeds of how we deal with our thinking. Once again, it's kind of like a narrow step. For some people, this is really, really helpful. For other folks, it's good to know, but maybe the busy brain isn't keeping them up at night. But when people are having worry and rumination, sometimes it can be because of the consequences of their sleep, or because they've had this long history of struggling with insomnia. They develop sleep dread. They're anticipating that sleep is going to be bad, and then it's going to have all these other consequences with it. So there are some really, really good, straightforward, what are called cognitive challenging exercises in which we teach people this process of writing down their negative thoughts and generating alternatives, better flexibility in their thinking. The trick is that we're only doing this during normal wakeful hours. So we don't want to do this at night, and we certainly don't want to do this during a wind down routine. So this exercise, because we really have to think about it, that wakes up the brain. This is an exercise we want to do during normal wakeful hours. Thought scheduling, however, this is just for the classic busy brain. My mind's just not worrying, but my mind just bounces around from different things, like stuff I got to do, tomorrow, some to-do lists, some random, thoughts. Or brain can be a busy type of thing. So sometimes 2 hours before our targeted bedtime. So say in the example of my targeted bedtime being 10 o'clock, this would be an 8 o'clock thing, taking 10 minutes, downloading, my thoughts, spending a minute or two reviewing it, putting it aside. Then when you wake up in the morning, pull it back out, review it, take, additional notes, or if you have to add things to your to-do list, and then put it aside, and then repeat, put it aside, then repeat, and put it aside. This can work really well. I do not recommend pop psychology saying, oh, why don't you put a notepad by your bedside, because writing things down is a wakeful activity, gets you thinking about stuff. So this is where writing it down in another room, reviewing for a couple of minutes, then reviewing it again within the first hour of waking up, the next day, that can actually be really helpful. It helps to retrain the brain of when to think about this stuff. And once again, nighttime always comes, so we can get into that rhythm. And as Metallica reminds us, for some of us, we do have heavy thoughts at night, so we got to kind of work with it and shape it down. All right. And then relaxation skills can also be helpful. Part of a narrow step there. So I wouldn't say that if you're really struggling with insomnia, that, what the problem is, you got to relax more. People can be doing awesome relaxing and still struggling with insomnia. That's why the stimulus control and sleep restriction, interventions are really, really helpful. But with relaxation, it's kind of like whatever works best for you. There are both passive and active forms of relaxation. Passive ones are the let along types of relaxation things. So like guided imagery is like a really good example of that, could be super helpful. Active are things you physically have to do to get relaxed. So there's progressive muscle relaxation where you're tensing and releasing, different muscle groups. even yoga, light stretching can be active forms of relaxation. Diaphragmatic breathing is an active form of relaxation because you're physically having to change how you breathe. The trick is whenever you're doing relaxation, pick a relaxation skill that you only use around bedtime. That's really the trick, because then that particular relaxation skill can get associated with the bed in the bedroom, nighttime, and sleep. So there's different places that people can use this. They can use it as just part of their wind down washout routine. If they wake up in the middle of the night during their sleep window, but it's still within that 15 to 20 minute area, that this can be very helpful to work on. That may help slip you back into feeling sleepy and falling asleep again. Or if you are up in the middle of the night and you're doing the best that you can with stimulus control, which can also be a little bit harder during the winter because you're getting up and going to another room and it may be a little bit chilly, doing relaxation training can be one of those boring things. Relaxation exercises are meant to be boring, meant to be monotonous as well too. So that can be one of those things that not only the physical act of tuning down our central nervous system, but can also be like pretty darn boring for us. So relaxation skills can be helpful. So let's kind of wind things up by talking about some resources, and I can even chat with Bridget about how to access whether it be these slides, or maybe we can just make a Word document of these resources, because we have some really good things that are out there. So self-help books, traditional way that we do self-help, there's lots of things that are out there. I think of old wine, new bottle, and that's not to say anything bad about any of these self-help books, but I'm all about value. So two books that are really, really well known. They've been out for a long time. They're by sleep specialists. Our own Peter Hari from Mayo Clinic Sleep Center. No More Sleepless Nights workbook's been out forever. Great, inexpensive. It's got all those skills that we just talked about. And then Greg Jacobs' Say Goodnight to Insomnia, also like a really, really good one as well too. Tons of self-help books that are out there. Plenty that are more expensive than these two. These two are absolutely great. There's some really good web-based resources. So the National Sleep Foundation has some awesome education, information, tips, really good place, to go to. One of my favorite ones that was developed over the course of the pandemic was out of Canada and Dalhousie University, mysleepwell.ca. Really nicely designed, actually, website, really cool the way that they've made it very user-friendly and easy to navigate. But they've done an excellent, excellent job of really putting down very practical step-by-step skills to help promote sleep, and a lot of great information on sleep impacts during COVID-19, tips for remote workers and other things. So I really, really like this website and resource. Again, totally free to use. Talking about free to use, I am a huge fan of mental health apps. That was actually one of the things that we chatted about around this time last year. But the VA has done an awesome job with developing a whole suite of mental health apps, all of which are totally free to use and non-identifiable information. So they are standalone things. They used to have an app, well, they still do have an app called CBT-I Coach. That's been the one that's been out for a long time. But over last year, they kind of developed Insomnia Coach, which is just even a more slicker, kind of user-friendly app that does a really, really nice job and actually can be used standalone. They've actually done some preliminary research that people do benefit using this app on their own. Maybe the outcomes aren't quite as good as it would be if you're meeting with somebody in person or is more of an interaction. But this app is great. Again, budget conscious, free to use, easy to navigate, really, really good app. Of the sleep apps that are out there, that's the best one. And Mayo Clinic, we have developed what are called interactive skill building modules. And one of the first ones that we developed is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. This is free to use for any Mayo Clinic employee. We also push it out to our patients, especially here in primary care. But this is on an external website. And once again, you don't need any credentials to log into this. But this link will take you to a CBT-I program that we've developed in primary care. So it actually kind of walks through all the steps we've talked about today, and in a little bit more detail. There are some videos that further explain some of the principles that are here. This can also be found on the Employee Mental Health and Wellbeing website under the Training and Education tab. And this link that's within these slides will also take you to it. So I can chat with Bridget about maybe getting this on more of a Word document format, so the links are right there for you. And then in primary care, our integrated behavioral health team, these are mental health providers that are right here in primary care. This is the group that I work with. We also do run insomnia groups year round. We have some that are in person, but also we've adapted to the nature of the pandemic, and we have a CBT for insomnia group that's done virtually via Zoom. If anybody's ever interested, they're welcome to reach out to me or their primary care providers who can refer to that. Our sleep medicine folks also have some great resources and options of varying different step levels of care around behavioral therapy for insomnia. So always a good way to end things is hope that you have a good night's sleep tonight, but hopefully Sandman makes his way into seeing you. So happy to field additional questions or comments that folks have. And the one thing I can't live without is a coffee. That's me. I'm such a hypocrite, but I love coffee. The whole culture of coffee is like awesome too.
I do too. Thank you, Dr. Sawchuk, for a very informative information on sleep. So question, what are some recommendations on boring activities that have helped people when they're struggling to fall asleep?
Well, I gave away one. It was just like rewatching or listening to this lecture again, because I'll put you to sleep in no time with the boring but evidence-based content that was today. But we kind of think about things like reading is actually okay if it's done like super low light, but don't read something that's interesting. Read something that's totally boring, that you totally know what the material is about, because it helps to slow down the brain. Again, I'm a huge fan of relaxation related things that people can do. If they are going to listen to music, just make sure that you've got your earbuds that are there, listening to probably classical, soft kind of music is good. Sometimes we've had people just literally sitting there in the middle of the night when it's dark. I know it sounds kind of creepy a little bit, but when we're trying to work on promoting insomnia, we're just trying not to do things that will inadvertently engage our brain and wake us up. So once again, it could look fairly idiosyncratic. In our insomnia groups, we actually have a handout of boring things, a listing of boring things. So who knew that boring could actually be therapeutic when it comes to insomnia? It definitely is.
Okay, thank you. What is your opinion on melatonin?
Yeah, melatonin is an interesting one. It certainly can be helpful for some individuals. And we know that part of the basic biology of sleep, melatonin is an important agent in that. This may not necessarily be the best analogy, but one of the ways that we think about how melatonin can work is that when it gets dark, it signals to the brain that nighttime is coming, kind of like the tide rolling in, bringing in melatonin. When light comes up, it's a signal to the brain of receding melatonin. So if you think about it in that way, so hence the reason why the cool, dark, quiet, type of idea. And then when we wake up in the morning, actually using light, to kind of get us, awake and going. And in turn, why that disruption, can happen, because if we've learned inadvertently that I need to have the TV on in order to try to fall asleep at night, it's hard for the melatonin to, to be processed, as well as other, ways that the body gets itself ready biologically. Melatonin tends to play well, for folks. Anytime that anybody is considering melatonin or any other sleep agent, whether it be an over-the-counter thing, or prescription, definitely chat with your healthcare provider around that. Like most things, when we come to a sleep agent, it's only meant to be used over the short term to help regain our footing with our sleep. And then, once people get their sleep going, try to work at fading out the melatonin as well.
Okay. And final question.
Mhm.
Someone asked, it might be due to the circadian rhythm, but how do you cope when you're finding yourself sleepy between 5 and 7 p.m., but then really alert at 9 p.m.?
Yeah, this is really, really tricky, because sometimes we seemingly have these rhythms, as this person was mentioning, where we're kind of thrown off. Like why can't I, like, at 10 o'clock at night when I'm getting ready for bed, feel like I was, between 5 and 7. The real trick with that is doing the best you can to fight through it, in all honesty. We may be sitting down, kind of relaxing, and it's the first time we've been off our feet all day long, and then, kind of narcolepsy feeling kind of kicks in. And it's sad but true. But sometimes, like, even when we, like, say, just have a quick nap around that time of, say, 5 or even 7 minutes, it seemingly recharges the entire system. And wasn't like a super restorative sleep at all, but it seemingly recharged the system. So the best advice, honestly, and not to sound mean, is to really fight through it as best as we can. Get up, try to get more active, try to get interactive, try not to compensate with, more coffee to kind of get us going, because what it does is it helps to build up that sleep drive. So then, as we start to string, additional nights in a row, and then hitting that wind down routine, and then, getting to our targeted bedtime, hopefully those very same feelings that we're getting between 5 and 7 o'clock are now showing up when they should, closer to 10 o'clock, if that's your targeted bedtime.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sawchuk. And as you were chatting, as we think about improving habits such as sleeping, it can be challenging. So I was thinking of the Mayo Clinic values such as compassion, and to think of how we can give ourselves the gift of self-compassion as we work on these habits. So may you all give yourself that gift of self-compassion today. Thank you so much for attending.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.